let's bring in Pia Oberoi, who is Senior Advisor on Migration and Human Rights at the United Nations Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining us today, Pia. How prolific are these online scamming compounds?
Well, thank you for having me here. It's as you've said, it's a growing. Well, it has been an issue in the region for at least 2 or 3 years since the COVID pandemic, and there's a number of compounds, as you said, that have been repurposed in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic with the border restrictions. Have been repurposed by transnational crime groups into places in which people are forced to carry out scams against other people. So we say there's 2 sets of victims here. Of course, the people that have been scammed of in many cases, lots and lots of money, but also others that are forced to take part in perpetrating these scams in these centers around the Southeast Asia region. Well, we're calling on the governments really to think about, how these what the response looks like to these. These are very entrenched issues, as you said. They're operating in context of what we're calling polycriminality. So they're in places like special economic zones, but also in border areas, often which are conflict affected. So if we're looking at the Myanmar-Thai border, for instance, and we're hearing about, law enforcement operations happening on this border, there's an entrenched issues around, these scams and how the people are being treated there. So it's not going to be an easy issue. This has these have long roots, but there are ways in which it can be approached. Certainly, we have seen the ASEAN leaders, for instance, taking some steps. There's been a declaration issued in May between all of the ASEAN leaders, kind of committing themselves to take some action. We've seen a roadmap between ASEAN and the People's Republic of China around law enforcement response. What we really want to put a focus on is, of course, the people that have been caught up, because there's been some horrific levels of violence and abuse seen by the people that are being forced to commit these crimes. And it's often not that easy to understand, when we receive a fake WhatsApp inviting you to invest in a particular platform. You often don't know that behind that, there are people that are being forced to send these notices out to contact other victims, etc. So what we're really saying is that the human rights of these people should be at the center of any response. And there's really kind of entrenched issues of corruption and rule of law and accountability that need to be addressed if it's really going to be tackled in a meaningful way.
Pia, if we talk about the tourists for a minute, we're seeing Thailand taking a hit in terms of people feeling safe to go there. Are tourists in any danger related to these online compounds?
So none of the reporting that I've seen has indicated that tourists are, being snatched off the streets and dragged into these centers. In fact, the methods of recruitment are actually much more sophisticated than that. During the pandemic, we did see that there were people that had been, for instance, you remember the very extensive restrictions that we faced here in the region. There were many people that had lost their jobs because of business closure and other restrictions, and so were actually stranded in these target countries, and so approached in different ways to take up the jobs. But we haven't seen any evidence that, people that come for tourism are being somehow kind of whisked off into the scam compounds.
And, tourism, of course, vitally important to Southeast Asia. Could it be that economic pressure from tourism, of all things, could be enough to force these governments to really act to clean up some of these criminal elements happening along these borders?
I mean, what's interesting is that, of course, there's been quite a lot of media reporting around the situation. So there's certainly much more transparency, in a sense, around it than we have been seeing, for instance, last year. And that has, we believe, caused some response, some interest, particularly from the affected governments who are seeing that it's actually detrimental to their public profile to have this knowledge, around these kind of very, very entrenched issues. In terms of the response, we also don't know that many of the affected countries are struggling with issues around rule of law response, around corruption and collusion. And I think, as you have up on the screen, this is an incredibly lucrative business. There are billions of dollars that are being generated. And so really, it's kind of, in a sense, the political calculus is playing one issue off the other. Because there are other ramifications, to being seen as a country in which these scams are being carried out with impunity. You're seen as a country where trafficking victims are being abused with impunity. And so really, again, it's what we hope is that a human rights response sees a way forward where governments will understand that actually the reputation of the country does depend on a comprehensive response.